All right, I'm here with Larry Beck, who is a fantastic trust and estates attorney here in San Francisco. He's worked with many of my clients, and I wanted to bring him on because in the last 5 weeks since COVID and the shutdown has started, I have looked at my trust more than I have in the last 10 years. So I thought that some of you guys might be thinking, as morbid as it is, thinking a little bit more about your own mortality and how to protect your kids and your assets and that sort of thing. So I thought it'd be good to bring Larry on and have him enlighten us a little bit about trust and estates. Hey, Larry.
Good morning, Ruth.
Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So you've been doing this for about just a few years because you just graduated college, right?
2 years ago. I'm still learning, Ruth.
We're all still learning every day.
Yes.
So I think we can start with the basics. One of the things that I have, as you know, I sell real estate. And so I'm always recommending to all of my clients that they set up a trust, particularly when they have kids. I always recommend it to them. And sometimes, especially your first time buyers will ask, what is that? Why do I need that? So can we start with the basics on a trust?
Absolutely. Okay. So when you're going to do a trust, Ruth, you have to know that a trust is an entity. It's like a corporation, except it's much more flexible. Why is a trust an entity and why does it make any difference? Because when you put your assets in an entity and you pass away, the entity survives you. So your assets don't have to go through probate, which is a bad thing for anybody's assets to have to go through.
Got it. So if I have a will established, then I'm still going to go through probate. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. A will does not avoid probate. A will is a letter basically to the judge. It's a formal letter saying, Mr. Judge, Your Honor, here's what I want to happen when I die. So in that respect, a will is better than nothing because it tells you who's going to be in control of dispersing your assets. That's called an executor. And it names your beneficiaries, but it still has to go through probate.
Got it. And so how much does probate cost?
Okay. Probate is very expensive. And when you do a probate, there are what's called statutory fees. They're set by the state of California. And why are they so expensive? Because guess who sets them? The attorneys that are in practice in the state of California.
Those dirty attorneys.
Those horrible attorneys. Anyway, there are more attorney jokes than just about any other profession. So I'm used to them. I even tell them sometimes. Anyway, so the cost of probate is based on the gross estate, meaning you don't subtract out the mortgages. So when you're figuring out the probate fees that you're going to pay to the attorney, it's based on it. Let's say you have a house and it's worth $2 million, and then you have bank accounts worth $1 million, and your house has a mortgage of $1 million. Your probate estate for determining your statutory attorney's fees is still $2 million. You don't subtract, I'm sorry, $3 million.
$3 million,
You don't subtract out the mortgage in determining it. And guess what? Your executor gets the same amount as the attorney that handles it. So here's how it's figured out, Ruth. For the first $100,000, the statutory fee is $4,000. For the next $100,000, it's $3,000. So it's 4% of the first 100,000, 3% of the next 100,000, 2% of the next 800.
Okay, so on $3 million, what's the average?
about $45,000 to the lucky attorney that gets to do your probate, Ruth.
So that must be what you charge to set up a trust.
Absolutely not.
So what
Okay,
does an average trust cost?
Okay, so trust costs can vary according to the attorney that does it. I like to consider myself in the low middle range for San Francisco attorneys. So if I do what's called a vanilla living trust, I charge a flat fee, all included, for what I call estate planning 101, and it's $4,000. And it's got all the bells and whistles that you need to have what's called a basic estate plan. Now, that's for a married couple. If it's a single person and it's vanilla, it's $3,500. And, you know, of course, like any other business, including yours, the people, my clients, compare prices before they become my clients. And they'll find that if they go to the larger law firms, it's going to be a lot more than that. I'm at a boutique firm, so I'm low middle range.
Got it. So somebody's going to save about $40,000 on average by hiring you.
Correct.
Wow.
So there's more money that you spend up front when you do a living trust, but it saves you tons of money and tons of time on the other end.
Got it. Awesome. All right. So we know, so one of the things that I feel about setting up a trust is that it's going to protect my kids. And that's why with my clients, whenever they have kids, I'm always like, okay, this is really important. So I really appreciated that when I set up the trust, that I had a professional there to help guide me think through all of the things and the decisions that would need to be made for my children, such as, you know, for starters, obviously, who do they go to? But then, like, how is money given to them and that person, and how is that all protected and all of that? So can we talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Okay. So generally, you have to make a bunch of decisions, especially if you have more than one child. So a married couple comes in and let's say they have 3 kids. So the first thing I ask them is, on a second death, is it going to go equally to the 3 kids? And you might be surprised at some of the answers that I get.
Wow. Well, I guess once you're dead, you can show your cards.
Absolutely. So I hear some very strange stories, Ruth. I don't like the person that this kid is married to. So
oh my gosh.
If I have 3 kids, it's going 40, 40, 20 in terms of percentage. And the one whose spouse I don't like gets the 20%.
Wow.
So that's the first question that I have to ask.
I'll be sure to remind my kids that before they get married.
So you have more leverage than you think, Ruth.
That's right.
Anyway, then if you have young kids, which I know you do, the question becomes, you don't want to, on the death of the second spouse, for the kids to get the assets directly because they don't know how to handle money, especially, you know, a 12-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 4-year-old.
Right.
So ordinarily, people set up what's called a testamentary trust for their kids. And it's part of the living trust. In other words, when you die, you don't have to set up some additional trust. It's part of your regular language in your living trust. And it says that on the death of the second spouse, let's say the assets are going to go equally to the 3 kids, and there's going to be a trust set up for each kid's third of the assets. And generally, the trustee, that's the person in charge, has the discretion of giving them money as they need it for college, to start a business, to get married, whatever they need it for, until they reach a certain age. And then when they reach a certain age, the trust terminates and they get the money and they can do with it as they please. And you should hear some of the ages that I've gotten.
We have ours set up at 39. I think they get, I want to say they get a third when they're 28 and then the rest at 39. So we didn't want to we want our kids to go and work for a living, and we don't want them, I'm sure that they won't, but we don't want them to be, lazy because they don't have an incentive to work.
I hear that a lot, Ruth. And I'm going to say that the most common age when they don't do it, yours is in tranches. They get a certain percentage when they hit a certain age. A lot of them are not in tranches, that people don't want to be bothered thinking about it. The most common age is 28.
Okay.
And they hear the same rationale over and over again. Well, 25 sounds a little young. 30 sounds a little old. Okay, 28.
Interesting. So the other thing that's really important right now is a healthcare directive, which is a nice thing that this is wrapped into a trust as a standard situation. So what's in a healthcare directive? Why do I need one? And how does it apply to our current situation?
Okay, so healthcare directive nominates a person to make decisions for you if you're incapacitated so that you can't make your own decisions. And it applies only to healthcare. There's also a durable power of attorney for financial purposes, but that applies to money. This is purely for healthcare. Why is that important? In general, it's important because that person that you nominate is in charge of pulling the plug and taking you off of any ventilator or whatever it is that you may have in place. So that's one decision that they make. Let's say
what was it? Terry Shava? What was that chick in Florida? This was like the worst case scenario, right?
That was in Florida, and it was a Shavo case.
Yes.
She didn't have a healthcare directive. So she was on a ventilator and she was in a coma, and the doctor said she was brain dead. And her husband said, take her off the ventilator, and her parents said, leave her on.
Right.
And
what a miserable situation, for, the families to be in whenever the person probably did have an opinion, right?
Yes, absolutely. So in these things, you put down the person that you want to make the decision. And you also voice your opinion that you want to be taken off of life support, or you don't want to be taken off of life support. You can say, I don't want to be taken off of life support. Predominantly, Ruth, people say that they want to be taken off of life support.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what's critical right now. Some of these directives say that people don't want to be intubated.
What is intubated?
So intubated is what's happening when people are on a ventilator.
Okay.
So with this coronavirus, there are a lot more people being intubated than in normal situations. So for people that already have this healthcare directive done, they need to look at it, because sometimes it says, I don't want to be intubated under any circumstances. And the circumstances have changed. So they may think that they have all this stuff under control, because under normal circumstances, yeah, it makes sense not to be intubated, but they should look at their healthcare directive if they have one.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The thing that I love about both of these things, because I come from a family, I have 8 siblings, and it's complicated, right? Like people, oh, wasn't it great to grow up in a big family? Oh yeah, it had its times, but it's very complicated. The relationships are complicated. And I think that, I've talked to my parents multiple times about getting things set up properly, because, when they die, which unfortunately they will, right? The infighting that can happen, like there's nothing I want that they have, but there will be things that people want, right? And so if all of that stuff is not laid out, not to mention, the health stuff and all of that, it just creates like so much stress and like potential for like really badly damaged relationships. And, even though this stuff is not that fun to think about, I just think it's really selfish not to take the time to think about it in advance. And instead, like the potential for leaving it to your kids or your relatives to deal with in your absence and trying to figure out what you would have wanted.
I'll tell you some of the interesting things that people don't think about. So, first of all, I would say in the last month, I've had 4 of these where people explicitly make directions about what is to happen with their pets.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And how much money is to be left to the people taking care of their pets.
Interesting. I bet you see that a lot in San Francisco.
One guy this week is leaving $100,000 for the care of his dog.
Wow.
So the lucky person is going to be very happy about that situation.
You could buy it. You could buy that dog a house in Missouri.
All right. And so that's one crazy thing that happens. Also, sometimes, Ruth, if people have especially a lot of jewelry, and they just say everything goes equally to the kids, sometimes they're going to have kids that that's the biggest fight of all.
Yeah.
I've seen terrible fights over splitting up jewelry,
I
not
bet.
money.
Right.
So,
yeah. How do you decide what's equal about like the brooch that you got for your anniversary, 25th anniversary and your first wedding ring? And, people are going to have different feelings about all that. So I could totally see that happening.
Absolutely. So I always tell my clients, clarity is really important with this stuff. And
so I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Another thing, Ruth, is that you and I both come from vanilla families.
My family is not vanilla, Larry. I mean,
no. Your current, your current family.
Oh, my current family. Yes, I would say.
Hey, I don't know your past family that well, Ruth, but your current family, you and I both have the vanilla situation. We're on our first marriage.
Yes.
We have a couple of kids and they seem to get along and so on and so forth. But there are plenty of situations where there are mixed marriages, so to speak.
Yeah.
Mixed family situations where a husband and wife get married and the husband has 2 kids from a prior marriage and so does the wife.
Yeah. And
it gets very dicey in terms of what's going to happen and who's going to get what. So
yes. Go ahead. I'll have something to add to that I'm sure you can talk about.
Okay. So again, clarity is the most important thing. You got to elicit from people what they want to happen so that it doesn't end up being this big amorphous mess on the
Absolutely.
second.
That's where the attorneys are so important, because it's like we can't, it's like most of us haven't, thank God, dealt with a lot of deaths, right? So, thinking through the things that can come up is just not something that's going to come natural to any of us. One of the things I remember that we have in ours is a clause that says in the event that our kids get divorced, that the trust is in a separate trust and that the ex-wife does not have access to any of the things that they inherited, which was something that we thought we wanted to protect those assets for them, right?
Sounds like a good idea.
I think.
Too bad we didn't meet before you did your estate plan, Ruth.
I know, it was a long time ago. I think we called it the Skank Clause.
So it sounds like somebody did a good job on yours.
Yeah, no, she definitely did. But, so once it's set up, is this something like it's done? I never have to think about it again. Like, how does it work in terms of maintaining it?
Okay. So the important thing after you set your trust up is you have to make sure that your assets are in your trust. And you do that by titling your assets. It's usually going to say John Doe and Jane Doe as trustees of the John Doe and Jane Doe Living Trust, dated April 21st, 2020. So that's in general how you title your assets so that they're in the trust.
That was almost as painful as changing my name when I got married. Like,
Yeah.
that was not fun, changing all of those things.
No,
And
I
the
get
other thing that I was just getting cleaned up with the help of my friend, Susan, who I did a talk with on insurance, is that after she reviewed some of my insurance, and my trust has been set up for 8 years, she realized that some of it did not have the trust named as additionally insured. So that was something that got missed. And these are the kinds of things that when somebody tells me that, I start spiraling. I'm like, oh my God, what else have we missed? Like, we're trying to protect all these people in our lives and do all the right things. And then, you miss filing some certain paperwork, and that really stresses me out.
All right. So the bad news about what happens, Ruth, if you miss titling your assets, if it's more than $166,000 worth of assets, then it ends up going through probate anyway.
Right.
So you defeated the whole purpose of setting up your living trust.
Well, except for, tell me, please, that if it was only, let's say it was $200,000 in a savings account that you forgot about, that's only the amount that's subject to the probate, not everything, right?
That's correct.
Okay,
Only
thank God.
the assets that are not in the trust have to go through probate.
Okay, thank goodness. So it's not as bad, but we have been trying, and we're not, I was actually just this morning making a list on my calendar reminder for my property taxes. I decided to add in, like, okay, here's all the other things that we should be looking at, like, yearly, right? So that I get that reminder. And one of them, and we know that we should be doing it, but one of them should be like reviewing the trust, which we hadn't done. Well, I think we did it. I want to say we did it 3 or 4 years ago, but not since then. And so I spent a lot of time recently just making, like, every account was wrong. We had changed banks since then. Like, so just making sure, like, all the things the trust was named on all of them. It just wasn't, like, nicely categorized in my folder. Our life insurance had changed. So just making sure that all of those policies and everything were there, and that they were easy to find for whoever was, getting to use that binder at some point.
Well, I'd like to think, Ruth, that a trip to visit me for someone like you is better than going to the dentist.
Depends on how good your teeth are. If you floss every day, going to the dentist is not that bad.
A lot of people are, I really don't want to do this. I know I have to do it, and they finally get around to do it, and then they just push the stuff away. They throw it in the corner. They don't want to think about it after it's done. And it's not really brain surgery to maintain your trust. You just have to be aware that it has to be done.
Right. That's where I think you just, it's like filing taxes. Nobody likes to do it, but every once in a while, once a year, you got to do it. Right. So just going back in and checking those things, I think, is great. I mean, the initial like emotional part of setting up a trust, I have to say, it's tiring. Like, it's very taxing to think about how you want your money handled. These are such big decisions that I feel like it is, like, I felt when we finally got it done, because it was like on our to-do list for many years before it got finished. When we finally got it done, I felt like we had really accomplished something fantastic. So I think that, it's definitely important, but I totally can relate to why people delay it. At the same time, you got to go to the dentist, you got to file your taxes, you got to do a trust, right? You got to make sure people are protected.
I would say yes. So I try to make it as painless an experience as possible, but it's really amazing, Ruth. I can't tell you how many calls I get from people saying, I always give them a duplicate original of their trust to take home.
Sure.
And I tell them, put it in a safe place. You wouldn't believe the number of calls I get saying, we lost our paperwork. Something that important to lose and not even remember where you put it, it's just amazing. So it's out of sight, out of mind a lot of the time, and it really shouldn't be.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so we talked about like I guess the boring reasons about trust, but some of the really exciting reasons as we all grow our incomes and our estates is that there's some really good tax incentives as you start building more and more wealth. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Okay, so there are all kinds of tax implications when you do a living trust. And one of the things that you have to be aware of is the estate tax. And the estate tax is a one-time tax. They take a snapshot. The IRS basically takes a snapshot of all the assets that you own when you pass away. And if they exceed a certain amount, then you're subject to estate tax, and it's 40% on the excess.
That's what, 16 million right now?
It's 11.58 million per person.
Per person.
So you have to, all you have to really remember is that if you're married, it's about 23 million for a married couple. Got
it. Well, I'm telling you, once I get 23 million, I'm happy to give half of it away. Just kidding. It's a good problem to have, but all right. So nobody wants to give their money away, especially after they've already paid taxes on everything. So what do you do?
So there are a whole bunch of ways to reduce the value of your taxable estate. One of which is you can give $15,000. Each person can give $15,000 per beneficiary per year. So for example, I have 2 kids. I could give away $15,000 per kid, and my wife could give away $15,000 per kid, and it never hits the radar on my overall estate. So I could give away $60,000 per year, and that would reduce the size of my ultimate taxable estate when my wife and I are deceased.
And when you say give it away, can you put it in like a retirement fund for them, or what do you mean by give it away?
You can put it into well, it's a little more complicated when you put it in a 529 plan, but that's one thing you can do. If they're old enough, then you don't really have to worry about putting it in a trust for them. If you really want to be simple, there's a thing called a custodial account. California Uniform Transfers to Minors Act allows you to put money in a custodial account for the beneficiary of your kid, and it can go until they're 25 years old in that custodial account, Ruth. So you don't have to set up a formal trust and get real complicated with it.
Do they get access to it when they're 25, or can you prohibit that? Because, you know, I'm a control freak.
No, unfortunately, the only way you can prohibit it is putting it in a trust for their
benefit. Got it.
But a lot of times they don't even know that they have access to it when they're 25.
Right. Interesting.
So
okay.
Yeah, you know, I get a lot of people. We just got one where somebody said, you know, our kids are 25 and the custodial account is supposed to end. And I said, do your kids know about it? And this was their father. And he said, no. And I said, well, you probably should tell them at some point. And he said, you know, I still want to be in charge of the assets. And you have to tell them, you know, it's a judgment call.
Got it. So with regard to property, I think we see this in San Francisco a lot where, you know, seniors do not want to sell their property because they don't want to pay taxes. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Okay, so you have per person a $250,000 exemption from capital gains on the sale of your primary residence.
Correct.
So you get a $500,000 exemption when you sell your primary residence. And if it's going to be more than that, okay. If it's a little more complicated than that, Ruth, but what you can do is if you wait until the first spouse dies, the survivor gets what's called a stepped up basis,
Right.
which means that your capital gain is determined by the fair market value on the date of death of the first spouse.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of planning that goes into selling your house. Is the appreciation more than $500,000? If it is, then you have one set of issues. If it's not, then
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these seniors, as you probably know, they bought their house for $150,000 like 30 years ago, and now it's worth $5 million. So that's a lot of money, and to deal with in taxes, right?
That's right.
So, but if they instead keep this house that's way too big for them, has been way too big for them for 20, 30 years, then they actually don't have to pay taxes on their death. Is that correct?
Okay, so
On the house.
The kids don't have to on
Right.
the second death. There's
Right.
no capital gain on the second death because you get a stepped up basis when the second spouse dies.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a planning idea. Sometimes it works, Ruth, and sometimes it doesn't.
When doesn't it work?
When the people say, I got to sell and I can't wait.
Got it.
Sometimes there's absolutely nothing they can do. Another option is they can move out and they can rent the place.
Sure.
So there are rules about how long you have to rent it. But if you rent it for a certain period of time, then after that time is up and you sell it, you can do what's called a 1031 transaction, and you put the proceeds into another rental property, and then nobody has to pay capital gains on that situation either.
Right. And then you can just pull some money out, but maybe not all. So you get the 500 tax free, and then you can, go after your 2 years, you can go buy another property. Right. And then that's tax free. So then it's just the remainder that you pay taxes on. So you get some.
It's a little more complicated than that, but I hear all this stuff a lot, and you have to sit down with the client and say, what are your objectives here?
Yeah.
What can you live with? And how important are the taxes to you? Some people say, I don't care. I want to sell. I want to get out. I'll pay the tax, and that's that.
Got it. All right. Well, any other big points that you feel that we should be aware of that I missed?
Just that I hear a lot, Ruth, that people that don't have any kids think, oh, I don't need a living trust. That's a horrible misconception, because let's say they get in a car accident and they don't have anything, and it's a married couple, and the husband dies right away, and then 10 days later the wife dies. Okay, so the wife is deemed under California law, because there's nothing in writing, to have survived the husband.
Okay.
And that means that when the wife dies 10 days later, all the assets are in her estate. They all go to her side of the family.
Interesting.
If she has parents, they go to her parents. If she doesn't have parents, it goes to their siblings. So the husband's assets,
assuming there's no will, right?
Correct.
Right. Interesting. Correct. I didn't know that. So I'll do a better job on advising my clients. So thank you for teaching me that piece.
Also, gay couples and people that are living together as partners, if they don't have anything in writing, it's not going to the partner when they die if they're not married.
Right.
And that's also a horrible misconception.
Right. And also with a health directive too, that's been a really big problem for same-sex couples that are not, in a domestic partnership or married, right?
Right. Absolutely. So
well, I learned something new. So that was great. I love that. Anything else?
I'd say there are all kinds of things that people should know about property taxes. I deal with transfers of property all the time.
Yeah.
And, maybe we'll do another webinar about that, about how people hold title to property, Ruth, and how their property taxes are impacted by the way they transfer the property to family members.
Okay, let's do it. I'm making a note right now. So Larry, if people want to get in touch with you now that we've scared the crap out of them, and they realize that they better do this tomorrow, I'll definitely include your information in the webinar, but anything that they should know in terms of how to schedule with you or anything like that?
I'm working during these horrible times, so you know, they should feel free to contact me. A lot of people are doing it. I've been contacted by 2 ER doctors that work for Kaiser in the last week, and they're very nervous about what's happening.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's a good way to get your assets in order.
I mean, this is the first time I have to say, like, you know, before this, it was like, okay, maybe we're on a plane or something like that. But suddenly this is the first time that we thought, like, this really could be us. And then also, you know, my sister lives next door to me, and like, you know, it could be her, like it could be all of us. Right. So, I mean, highly unlikely, but it became more of a reality in the last month than it ever has been, in terms of like, oh my gosh, we really, really need to get this in order and make sure that, you know, all of the things are protected and laid out properly.
I'd say that's very prudent advice.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Larry. I really, really appreciate it, and be safe out there, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Ruth. My pleasure.
All right. Take care.
You too.